How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to start a new series looking at the different sets that make up Pioneer. So we're going to look at blocks, and then as we move away from the block dynamic of set releases, we're going to look at each year. So starting off, we're going to look at the first block that makes up Pioneer, and that is Return to Ravnica Block, one of my favorites of all time. But before we get there, please be sure to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, as well as head over to my Twitch at twitch.tv/darthjacen. Drop a follow over there and catch all the live streams of Pioneer and other action during the week. If a card appears 3 or more blocks in Pioneer, we won't count it for one set. Examples being Negate, Duress, etc. All these commons, uncommons that show up a bunch, can't really give them to one set. It'd be kind of unfair. Secondly, cards have to see play in at least 1 or 2 decks that have consistent presence in Pioneer. There are going to be some cards that are on the line. There are going to be some cards that have seen play but don't now. Great example, Wild Slash. Obviously, hit me up in the comments down below if you think I've missed any cards or if you think that there are staples that aren't being mentioned. Let's start with Return to Ravnica. Obviously, when you talk about a Ravnica set, you have to start with the most famous staples, the Shocklands. Now, the Shocklands do exist in all 3 sets in the block, but we are going to keep it to the 5 that do actually appear in Return to Ravnica specifically. So in Return to Ravnica, you have Hollowed Fountain, Steam Vents, Blood Crypt, Overgrown Tomb, and Temple Garden. They are the foundation of the mana bases of Pioneer. Next up, we're going to look at Rakdos' Return. While this isn't as prevalent of a card, it does see play in Niftalite sideboards on and off. Next, you see Supreme Verdict. Obviously a huge part of the blue-white control or Jeskai control shells, as well as Fires of Inventions or any deck in blue-white that needs Wraths. As you probably picked up in Ravnica sets from the Shocklands as well as past, a lot of these cards are going to be multicolored because the power level is put into multicolored spells. Very, very pertinent in Pioneer. Next up, we have Slaughter Games, a Niftalite staple. It comes, it goes, depending on the meta. Great in times of dealing with things like Lotus Field or Jeskai Ascendancy combo. Another one of these uncounterable spells from this cycle, along with the next one, which is Abrupt Decay. This card has been a staple in basically every format since its printing. Being able to interact with 3 mana value and less card is very important. And again, that's no different in Pioneer. You'll see it in Niftalite, you'll see it in green-black decks, you'll see it basically anywhere it's castable. Next up, we have Azorius Charm. Along with Is It Charm, these are the 2 major charms of the 5 set from Return to Ravnica that see play consistently. Azorius Charm obviously sees play in blue-white Jeskai control as a cantrip, as well as a way to mitigate aggro decks. Is It Charm is a staple of the blue-red Phoenix or blue-red Drake's deck, being able to dig for your specific answers, fill up your graveyard for your delve cards, or just put Phoenixes in the graveyard. Having a little bit of extra interaction, never a bad thing in Pioneer. Next up, we see Detention Sphere, another one of the cards that really only exists in blue-white control, but it serves a very important purpose there where it's able to answer problematic permanents. Next up, we have Dreadbore, and again, if you're seeing a theme here, Niftalite is going to be heavily represented in the Ravnica sets because of the dual colors of the guilds. Dreadbore also sees play in Red-Black Arcanist, just a clean answer that's able to take out planeswalkers and any creature, very helpful in a format with such powerful threats. Next up, we have Mizzium Mortars, the bane of every player who played limited other than Packrat. In Return to Ravnica, you have a lot of good quality removal. Mizzium Mortars has started to see play in these red-green aggressive decks, backed up by a ability to get to 6 mana pretty reliably with your elves, as well as being able to mitigate some of the blockers that will stop things like your Quarry Bringers or Questing Beasts. Next up, with Rest in Peace, major sideboard cards of the format, able to go into basically any white deck and is very pertinent in dealing with decks like Red-Black Arcanist. Next up, we have another sideboard slot in Pithing Needle. This was one that I had to check to make sure it didn't break our 3 block rule, but it's only been printed in 2 blocks, as with the Shocklands and other things on this list, in Pioneer. Pithing Needle, obviously a great card, sometimes supplanted by other cards with a similar effect. Still a ubiquitous card that will see play on and off depending on the meta. Last up from Return to Ravnica, as far as staples go, we have Ethereal Armor, a card that's often forgotten to have been from the Ravnica sets, but did spawn a Grand Prix winning deck in its time in Standard, the Bant Pants deck. It now sees a similar role all over the place in Modern, Pioneer, all having these enchantment-based auras decks, both white, black, green, white, and Abzan in Historic. Hugely powerful card, great to see it. So that is Return to Ravnica. Obviously, if you notice, there are a lot of staples. This set has a ton. 17 unique staples in this set. Obviously, it's the first set we've talked about in this series, but it will be be the front runner for a while, I have to imagine. Next up, we have Gatecrash. Obviously, let's start with the other 5 Shocklands, as those will be a huge part of this discussion. But you have Sacred Foundry, Godless Shrine, Water Grave, Breeding Pool, and Stomping Grounds, rounding out the other 5 color pairs in Pioneer. Obviously, these, much like the previous ones, huge staples, see play in every deck that can play them, and are format-defining lands. Boros Charm, obviously a huge staple in Burn, as well as seeing play in decks like Feather. And then you have Burning Tree Emissary, a highlight of early Pioneer in the mono-green Devotion decks, and it still sees play there, but it also makes its way into these red-green aggressive decks to fuel some of your early starts. Finally, you have a Lotus Field staple in Thespian Stage, another one of those cards that sort of came into play in the Lands Matters elements of this block's Maze's End style, but it sees a lot of play in all formats, mostly due to Dark Depths, but in this format due to Lotus Field. Again, while the Shocklands make up the majority of Gatecrash's influence on Pioneer, these other cards do start to see play here or there. Now we move on to Dragon's Maze, which again, because it does have all 10 of the Shocklands, those would be counted, but because they're counted independently the first times they're printed here in Return to Ravnica and Gatecrash for Pioneer, I'm not going to give Dragon's Maze the credit for them. However, Dragon's Maze does add quite a few powerful cards that see play. You have Blood Baron of Viscopa, obviously one of the premier sideboard cards out of Niv-to-Light that has given decks using black removal a really hard time, as well as one of the cards that really gave vampires a tough time. Obviously, another Niv-to-Light sideboard card, as well as seeing play periodically in other decks, you have Notion Thief. Notion Thief adds a big element of interaction for decks like Niv-to-Light, being able to turn off the cycling, filtering, and card draw of control decks, as well as threaten planeswalkers on end step. A card that's come and gone out of the Pioneer format, but is often played in humans decks, so as we see more and more human style decks come, we might see this again, is Sin Collector. Currently seen in the 5-color Enigmatic Fires decks, the Sin Collector is able to really interact well with control decks, as well as hamper certain combo decks by exiling the spell, which is very pertinent in a format where graveyard matters. Next we have Voice of Resurgence, a card that comes up periodically in the green-white Hate Bear style decks, but is a staple of Winota, one of the top decks in Pioneer right now. Finally, from Dragon's Maze, we have another sideboard card. Again, Dragon's Maze added a lot of good sideboard cards, but didn't quite have the power level to affect the main deck of Pioneer, and that is in Wear Tear, played everywhere it can be, as it's so efficient on one side, both sides, or being able to combine them. Now let's take a look at 3 cards from this block, not currently fitting our definition of seeing enough play to count, that I think are the top 3 cards that could break out. First, we have Deathrite Shaman. Obviously, I played this in black-green Death Touch. It's a incredibly powerful card, banned in Modern, absolutely worthwhile to see if we can make it work. With the absence of fetch lands, though, a lot less powerful, but like I said, I think there's a lot of potential as we see more and more things filling graveyards to be able to get a more reliable sense of activating it for mana. Next up, we have Aurelia the War Leader. She is incredibly powerful and did see play in the Bant Godpharaoh's Gift deck that was a hot commodity for a week or two, but in reality, she hasn't seen anywhere near the play she did, even in Standard, as a sideboard threat to pair with some of the Flying Dragons to just kill your opponent out of nowhere out of control decks. Finally, we have one of the most played Planeswalkers in its Standard format that really hasn't seen any light of day in Pioneer, and that is Domri Rod. I love this card. It's one of my favorites. Its ultimate's unbeatable. Its plus is a continual source of card advantage, and it has a fight to be able to clear the path. The newer Domri from War of the Spark probably supplants it, but I do think there are decks that would want this kind of effect, especially these red-green decks that have started to see play. So from this block, what do we have as the set with the most banned cards? Well, none. It's very refreshing to see an incredibly powerful set pushed at its time to really affect Standard that didn't require any bans. The cards are all fairly high power, but none of them push into the need of banning. Next up, we have the set with the most played cards. As we mentioned before, 17 individual unique played cards in Pioneer in Return to Ravnica. Obviously, I think this is going to be the front runner for a while, but as we see more and more high power sets in the future, I think we will see it dethroned. Next up, we have the set with the least played cards. It's currently Dragon's Maze. Again, a little bit of an asterisk there that it does have the 10 Shocklands, but because they exist in RTR and Gatecrash, I'm not going to count them again. Now, wrapping up, I want to take a look at the block's effect on Pioneer on a scale out of 1 to 5. Obviously, I think if only for the Shocklands, this would be a 5 out of 5, but it gives you so many other cards that see play. I think the Shocklands alone would be worth a 5, but this is one of the most represented sets in Pioneer. or blocks as well. Without having this as the starting point of Pioneer, the entire landscape of the format would be very different. So I'm very happy to give the Return to Ravnica block a solid 5 out of 5 on its effect on Pioneer. So be sure to check out our next video, which is going to be on the Theros block, another big 3-block set that gave a ton to Pioneer. Leave a comment down below. Tell me what cards you think I missed, what cards you think are your top 3 for most potentially impactful in Pioneer, and let me know what your favorite cards in these blocks are. For me, favorite card out of the RTR block has to go to Rakdos' Return, one of my favorite cards from Jund of Standards Old, and I love getting to play with it whenever I can. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed. Until next time.